My business partner impregnated my wife and tried to take my company. My mother knew and told me to raise the child anyway. Can you imagine building your life, brick by brick, for over a decade? Your business, your marriage, your closest friendships, only to discover the two people you trusted most were systematically dismantling it. Not just stealing from you, but planning to take everything? And then, she drops the bombshell. I'm pregnant. My blood ran cold, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that child wasn't mine. What would you even do in that situation? Alright, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you is going to mess with your head. My name's Gavin, I'm 40, and I live down here in coastal Georgia. For 12 long years, I poured every ounce of myself into building a company, Tidewater Protective Coatings, LLC. We specialized in industrial coatings and corrosion control. If that sounds boring, picture every steel bridge, every massive port crane, every storage tank near saltwater. They all rust. They all need blasting, priming, and coating, or they fall apart. It was a gritty business, but if you knew what you were doing, it was a gold mine. And I knew what I was doing. I started this company when I was 28 with Sheldon Pratt. Everyone called him Shell. We went way back to middle school in Rincon. We played ball together, got into trouble, even worked summers on the same shrimp boat out of Thunderbolt when we were teenagers. He was my best man when I married Karen. I was his when he married his first wife, a relationship that, well, lasted about 11 months before she cleaned out their joint account and vanished to Tallahassee with a bartender. When that happened, I drove him down there myself just to get his dog back because he was too broken to go alone. And when I was 22, flat broke after a layoff, Shell let me crash on his couch for 3 months, never asking for a dime. That's the kind of friendship I thought we had. The kind you build a life on. After his divorce, Shell stayed single, stayed hungry, and he poured everything into the business right alongside me. We were 50-50 partners, 2 equal members of the LLC. I handled the operations, the estimates, client relationships, managing the crews. Shell was the field general. He was brilliant with his hands, understood coding chemistry better than most engineers, and could push a crew through a 12-hour containment job in August heat without losing a man. He was indispensable. Karen came into the picture 5 years into the business. I met her at a Chamber of Commerce mixer in Savannah, a place I honestly didn't even want to be. She was sharp, organized, great with numbers, working admin for a trucking outfit. We dated for about 6 months, got married at the courthouse, and within a few months, she was running our office. That wasn't even my idea, it was Shell's. He pointed out we were bleeding money on a part-time bookkeeper who couldn't keep expenses straight and a temp who couldn't file worth a damn. Karen, he argued, could handle payroll, vendor management, invoicing, bank reconciliations, client billing, everything from one desk. She'd save us 40 grand a year and do a better job than anyone we could hire. He was right. Karen was exceptional. Within a year, she had our books tighter than they'd ever been. Our vendor relationships were organized, our billing cycle cut from net 45 to net 30. She set up QuickBooks, managed all the company credit cards, checking and savings accounts, processed payroll for our 15-man crew, and approved every purchase order. She had the keys to the kingdom. Every financial door in the company, Karen could open it without asking me or Shell. And I need to tell you something important about Karen, because it matters for later. She wasn't some passive, go-along-to-get-along type. She was sharp, in a way that could cut you if you weren't paying attention. She always knew exactly what to say to make you feel like her idea was actually yours. Always knew when to push and when to pull back. When vendors tried to jack up prices, she'd negotiate them down with this quiet, firm tone that made grown men apologize for wasting her time. Crew guys submitted sloppy timesheets. She'd send them back with corrections and a look that ensured it never happened twice. I honestly admired that about her. Shell and Karen got along well from the start. At the time, it just seemed like a good fit. He'd come by the office to grab work orders, they'd chat about schedules, joke around, normal stuff you expect from a small company where everyone's in each other's space. Then he started coming to dinner at our place every Saturday. Football Sundays in the fall became part of the routine. My wife, my best friend, my business partner, all sitting around my table, eating shrimp and grits, talking about the week. I truly thought I had a good life. I was so wrong. For about 3 years after Karen took over the office, everything ran smoothly. Our revenue climbed from $1.8 million to over $3 million. We landed a huge recurring maintenance contract with the Georgia Ports Authority, picked up bridge work for the county, got on the approved vendor list for 3 regional chemical plants. We bought a second spray rig, a new blast pod, a containment trailer, hired 4 more guys. I was so damn proud. I'd built something real in a town where most people my age were either working for someone else or had already washed out. Karen and I bought a house in Isle of Hope, nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre lot with a dock on the marsh. Shell lived 10 minutes away in a duplex he'd been renting since his divorce. Everything felt rock solid. The business, the marriage, the friendship. Then the numbers stopped adding up. It started with a blast media invoice. We use steel grit and garnet for most of our abrasive blasting, bulk orders, 40 to 60 tons at a time. I'd been tracking material costs loosely for years because Karen handled the purchasing and I trusted her numbers implicitly. But in March, a vendor rep named Dale from our garnet supplier called me directly. He thanked me for the increased volume and asked if we wanted to negotiate a tiered discount. Increased volume? We hadn't increased volume. If anything, Q1 had been lighter than usual because 2 bridge jobs got pushed to April. I pulled the purchase orders after the call. My stomach sank. Karen had been ordering garnet at roughly double our actual consumption rate for the past 7 months. The invoices were real. The vendor was real. The deliveries were logged. But the quantities just didn't match what our crews were using on actual jobs. I checked the delivery addresses. Half the shipments went to our shop. The other half went to a storage yard in Pooler I'd never even heard of. I drove out there on a Sunday. Industrial area off Pooler Parkway. Chain link fence. Gravel lot. A couple of shipping containers. And there it was, 6 pallets of bagged garnet, stacked under a tarp, with our vendors' lot numbers on the packaging. Someone was diverting our material here and selling it to smaller contractors at a markup. I took photos of everything. The lot, the pallets, the lot numbers, the address on the gate. Then I drove home and didn't say a word to anyone. That was the first crack. And I kept quiet. Not to Karen, not to Shell. Years of running a business teaches you that the worst thing you can do when you suspect a problem is announce that you suspect a problem. You watch. You wait. You gather information until you have enough to act decisively. Over the next 3 weeks, I went through every vendor file Karen managed. I did it at night, after she went to sleep, copying invoices and statements onto a thumb drive from the shared office computer. What I found was methodical. A company called Low Country Equipment Solutions had been billing us for containment scaffolding rentals on projects where we owned our own containment gear. 7 invoices over 7 months, totaling just over $48,000. This company had a website, a phone number, a P.O. box in Pooler. I called the number from a burner app on my phone. Nobody answered. I checked the Georgia Secretary of State business filings online. Low Country Equipment Solutions was registered 8 months prior. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize. Keely Brampton. I searched the name. Nothing. A dead end. Then I searched the P.O. box. The exact same box number showed up on the garnet overflow shipments. That's when my stomach dropped completely. Not because I'd caught a thief, but because I realized the thief was someone I trusted completely. And I didn't yet know which one. 2 days after I found the P.O. box connection, Karen came to me at the house with a manila folder. She said our liability insurance carrier wanted updated documentation. She needed me to sign a revised operating agreement that would streamline banking authorizations. She made it sound like routine housekeeping. I opened the folder. The revised agreement gave Karen sole signatory authority on the company's primary checking and savings accounts, removing the existing requirement for a member co-signature on withdrawals over a certain threshold. It also adjusted the buyout clause, replacing mutual consent with a provision allowing either member to trigger a buyout based on a material breach. In practice, that meant if they could build a paper trail showing I'd violated some duty, real or fabricated. Either one of them could force me to sell my member interest at whatever valuation they controlled. And with Karen running the books, controlling the valuation wouldn't be hard at all. I read every page. Karen watched me, leaning against the kitchen counter with that patient look she used when she wanted you to feel like you were overthinking something simple. "The insurance guy needs it by Friday," she said, her voice smooth. I closed the folder. Told her I'd have my own guy look it over first, just to be safe. Standard practice. Something shifted behind her eyes, just for a flicker. Then she smiled and said, "Sure, no rush, whenever I got around to it." She took the folder back and never mentioned it again. I hired a forensic accountant named Roa out of Jacksonville. CPA, certified fraud examiner, 20 years experience in fraud cases involving small and mid-sized contractors. I gave her the thumb drive, explained the setup, and told her I needed a full picture before I confronted anyone. Roa took 2 weeks. During that time, I tested Karen once. Casually, over breakfast, I mentioned the Pooler storage yard. Said one of the guys told me we had material sitting in a lot off Pooler Parkway, and I wanted to know what it was. Karen didn't flinch. Not a muscle. She put her coffee down and gave me this look, half annoyed, half amused. "That's overflow from the Savannah River Bridge job. We didn't have room at the shop. I told you about this in January." She hadn't told me anything in January. I would have remembered authorizing storage costs at an off-site location, but she said it with such flat certainty that for about 3 seconds, I actually wondered if I'd forgotten. Then she added, "I can pull the PO if you want, but honestly, I've got payroll and the GPA invoice to finish today. Can it wait?" Translation: stop asking questions and let me handle it. I told her it could wait. Smiled. Went to work. She handled it all right. By the time I checked the following week, the Pooler delivery records in our system had been reclassified under a legitimate project code. She'd cleaned the trail. Not well enough for Roa, but well enough that a trusting husband would have never looked twice. What Roa found was worse than what I'd suspected. The fake vendor billings through Low Country Equipment Solutions totaled $48,000 over 7 months. But that was just one channel. Roa found padded invoices from legitimate vendors where Karen had inflated quantities and pocketed the difference. Reimbursement claims for fuel purchases at stations nowhere near our job sites. Padded payroll entries for 2 employees who hadn't worked on the dates listed. The garnet overages, when you tracked where the excess material actually went and who sold it on the secondary market, added another $28,000. And 3 client payments that had been rerouted to an account at a credit union in Hinesville that didn't belong to the company. The credit union account was in Sheldon Pratt's name. Roa laid it all out in a bound report with exhibits. $211,000 had been siphoned from Tidewater protective coatings over the past 11 months through a coordinated scheme that required both financial access and operational knowledge. One person handled the books. The other knew enough about our work to make the fake invoices look legitimate. Karen and Shell. Together. Roa asked if I wanted her to stop there. I told her to keep digging. She found the Low Country Equipment Solutions registration, tracked down Keely Brampton, Karen's cousin on her mother's side, a 23-year-old nursing student in Statesboro who probably had no idea her name was being used to register a shell company. I sat in Roa's office, looking at that report, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage, not grief, just something quieter. The feeling of understanding exactly what was happening and knowing exactly what I was going to do about it. But I wasn't done finding things out. Fraud makes people sloppy. They get comfortable. And that's how the rest of it came out. I had a security camera installed in the office. Standard security coverage in a common area. Posted notice. Video only. No audio. That's all I needed. 3 days in, I reviewed footage from a Thursday evening. Karen had stayed late. She wasn't working. She was pacing near the filing cabinet, on the phone, relaxed and laughing. No audio, but I didn't need it. That laugh wasn't for a vendor. The next morning, I was on the shared iPad, resetting a vendor login for the company accounts. A message preview popped up from Shell. One line was enough. He still has no idea about any of it. I almost feel bad. Almost. 4 days later, the The camera caught Shell coming into the office at 9 p.m. Karen was already there. I watched the feed on my phone from a motel room in Jessup, where I told Karen I was staying for an early morning tank inspection. They didn't do anything for the first 20 minutes. Just went through files, moved papers around, printed something. Business stuff. Fraud stuff. Then they were on each other. Right there. On the desk I'd built out of reclaimed lumber from a demolished warehouse on River Street, because I thought it had character. Before I closed the app, I rewound and paused on what they had been printing. Zoomed in on the pages sitting in the output tray. Couldn't read every word, but I could make out enough. It was the revised operating agreement. The same one Karen had brought me 2 weeks earlier, with the adjusted buyout clause and the banking authorizations. They'd been refining it, working on version 2, probably with language that would hold up better if I pushed back again. These two weren't just cheating. They were building a case to take my company. I watched long enough to confirm what I needed to confirm. Then I closed the app, set the phone down, and stared at the ceiling of that motel room for 2 hours without moving. My brain went back through every Saturday dinner, every handshake at the door, every casual look between them I dismissed. It rewrote all of it. Every single moment. The affair had been going on at least as long as the financial scheme, maybe longer. Shell had been to my house every single weekend for the past year. Dinner on Saturdays, football on Sundays. He'd sit at my table, eat food Karen cooked, shake my hand when he left, and then, apparently, come back when I wasn't home. The thought made my stomach churn. I spent the next week building my case. I downloaded every piece of footage. Backed up Roa's financial report to 3 separate locations. I met with an attorney named Juan Gatch, a litigation guy out of Savannah who specialized in business disputes and LLC dissolutions. Juan reviewed everything, asked pointed questions, and laid out my options with the kind of calm precision I needed. During that same week, I caught something else. One of my foremen, a solid guy named Tully, who'd been with us for years, mentioned that Karen had called the Port Authority project manager directly to reschedule our crane maintenance window. She told the PM that I was overextended and that she and Shell would be handling the coordination going forward. I called the PM myself, casual, friendly. He confirmed it, said Karen had been professional, said I was slammed with bids, and that Shell would be the primary point of contact for the next quarter. The PM didn't think anything of it, just internal reshuffling. It wasn't reshuffling. It was positioning. She was moving me out of my own client relationships so that when the time came to cut me loose, the clients would already be used to dealing with Shell and Karen. Smooth transition, minimal disruption, like I was the one being phased out of the company I built. I thanked the PM, told him I'd be handling things personally going forward, and made a note for Juan's file. Then Karen told me she was pregnant. She did it over dinner on a Wednesday. Grilled shrimp, rice, the works. She was smiling in this careful, practiced way. Told me she'd been to the doctor that morning, 8 weeks along. I did the math before my fork even hit the plate. 8 weeks put conception right around the time I was in Waycross for a 5-day pipeline job. I'd been gone Monday through Friday. Karen had told me she was sick that whole week. Stayed home from the office, barely texted. She wasn't sick. She was with Shell. I looked at her across the table and smiled. Told her that was great news. Hugged her. Said all the things a man says when he thinks he's about to be a father. I wasn't about to be a father, but I needed her to be comfortable and unsuspecting for what came next. There was one more thing I needed before I could move. I went to a walk-in clinic the following morning and got a full STI panel. Came back clean, which was honestly the only piece of luck I'd had in months. Juan Gatch and I met twice more that week. We laid out every step. Filed nothing yet. Signed nothing yet. Just prepared. It was like rigging containment before you start blasting. You don't fire the nozzle until every seal is tight and every vent is in place. Otherwise, the dust goes everywhere and you lose control. I wasn't going to lose control. 2 weeks after Karen's announcement, on a Saturday, I went to tell my mother. Drove out to her place in Guyton, the same cinder block ranch house I'd grown up in after my dad left when I was 6. She'd raised me alone, working the register at a feed store for 20-odd years. Never remarried, never complained. She was on the porch when I pulled up sweet tea on the side table. She looked happy to see me, which made what I was about to say so much harder. I sat down and told her everything. The fraud, the affair, the pregnancy that wasn't mine. I showed her the financial report, showed her the dates that proved the baby couldn't be mine. I didn't show her the video.
She didn't need to see that.
She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. The fan kept spinning. Somewhere down the road, a dog was barking. Then she said, "How far along is she?" I told her, 10 weeks. She nodded, folded her hands in her lap, looked out at the yard. "I've been waiting for you to have a child. You know that. I've waited years." I said, "I knew." Then she looked at me, her eyes firm. "So, here's what I think. Forget the DNA. Forget who did what. Raise the baby as yours. Let me be a grandmother. That's what matters here, not who slept with who." I looked at her for a long time. My heart, already bruised, felt a new, sharp pain. Then I said, "Are you serious? I'm not raising that kid. Don't ask me again."
She didn't stop.
She leaned forward in her chair and said it wasn't about me. Said it was about family. Said a child doesn't choose how it comes into the world. And neither should I punish an innocent baby because 2 adults did something wrong. Said she'd help. Said she'd be there every day if I needed her. Said the baby deserved better than what Karen and Shell could give it. And that I was the kind of man who could step up, even when things weren't fair. I stood up.
Didn't yell.
Didn't argue further. There was nothing left to discuss. She called after me from the porch. I heard her voice crack. Heard the chair scrape as she stood up. I drove away. 45 minutes back to Isle of Hope on back roads.
Didn't turn the radio on.
Pulled into my driveway, went inside, opened the hall closet, and took down every framed photo of my mother that hung in the house. 4 of them. Put them in a cardboard box, taped it shut, and set it in the garage next to the recycling. Over the next 2 days, she called 9 times. Texted paragraphs. Apologized, then doubled down. Said she didn't mean it the way it sounded, then said she did mean it, and I was being selfish, then cried and said she was scared of being alone. I read every message, responded to none. On the 3rd day, I called a utility company and canceled the auto pay I'd been running for her electric bill for the past 7 years. Called her cell carrier and removed her from my family plan. Stopped the monthly transfer I'd been sending to help cover her rent since she retired. She noticed within a week. Called me 14 times in 1 day. I didn't pick up. She drove to my house. I wasn't there. She went to the office. Karen told her I was on a job site. That was the last time I initiated or received any communication from my mother. I executed everything in 1 week. Monday through Friday. Planned it like a shutdown project. Every step sequenced, every contingency mapped. Monday morning, Juan Gatch filed an ex parte emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing all Tidewater business accounts, pending a forensic audit. The motion argued immediate risk of asset dissipation given that 2 individuals with direct account access were actively siphoning funds and had already demonstrated a pattern of covering their tracks. It included Roa's report, bank records, the fake vendor documentation, and an affidavit from Dale at the Garnet supplier confirming delivery. Discrepancies. The motion also sought injunctive relief, granting me temporary sole operational control of the LLC and barring Karen and Shell from the premises, pending a full hearing. The judge signed the emergency TRO before lunch. Hearing set in 10 days, but that was all the time I needed. Monday afternoon, I walked into the office where Karen was processing invoices and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal notice of termination from Tidewater Protective Coatings, LLC, effective immediately, along with a demand letter for restitution of all misappropriated funds. She opened it, read the first page, and her face went absolutely white. Then she flipped to the second page, the one with Roa's summary figures attached, and I watched her eyes track to the Low Country Equipment Solutions line item. That was when she knew exactly how much I knew. 2 of my crew guys were in the shop bay, 20 feet away, loading the spray rig for a Tuesday job. They stopped what they were doing, watched through the open door. Nobody said a word. She started talking. I walked out. Nothing she had to say would change anything. And I'd learned months ago that her voice was just a tool she used to manage people. Tuesday morning, a locksmith hit the shop at 6 a.m. New deadbolts on every door. New codes on the alarm system. Court order in hand, every bit of it legal. Then one filed a civil suit against Sheldon Pratt for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conversion, and unjust enrichment, including a civil RICO claim seeking treble damages and attorney's fees. The suit sought dissolution of the LLC, a full accounting of all diverted funds, and forfeiture of Shell's member interest. Shell was served at the duplex by a process server at 7:15 a.m. I know because Juan confirmed it by 7:30. Shell called me 11 times that day. I didn't answer. He showed up at the shop around 2 p.m. The locks I'd changed that morning kept him out. Shell stood in the parking lot pulling on a door that wouldn't open, and I watched from inside through the window blinds. Same parking lot where we'd shaken hands years ago and said, "Let's build something." He saw me watching, started yelling, pounding on the glass. I turned around and went back to the bid I was working on for a water tower record in Effingham County. Eventually, he left. Wednesday, I filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences, but the filing included a detailed exhibit of the affair evidence and financial fraud as grounds for equitable distribution in my favor. Georgia is a no-fault state, but judges still consider misconduct when dividing assets. One made sure every exhibit was clean, documented, and devastating. That same morning, I had the house locks changed, new deadbolt on the front door, new code on the garage. One had advised securing the residence the same day as the filing, and the timing was deliberate. Wednesday evening, Karen showed up at the house. I'd expected this. She stood in the driveway and tried the front door, which wouldn't budge. She knocked, then pounded, then called my name through the door. When I didn't answer, she sat on the porch steps for an hour. I watched from the back of the house through a window facing the driveway, the same way I'd watched Shell at the shop. She wasn't crying. A woman who'd been caught cheating would cry. A woman who'd been caught stealing would panic. Karen was doing neither. She was sitting there thinking, running scenarios, calculating her next move. She finally left. The divorce papers were waiting at her friend's address the next morning. Thursday, Roa's report was formally submitted as a criminal referral to the Chatham County DA's office. Theft by deception, identity fraud for using Keely Brampton's name without consent, and theft by conversion. One didn't promise charges would be filed, but he said the case was clean enough that a prosecutor would at least look at it seriously. Friday, I met with every active client Tidewater had, in person where possible, by phone where not. I explained there had been internal financial irregularities, that my business partner was no longer with the company, and that all existing contracts would be honored by me personally with no interruption in service. I brought the Port Authority project manager a folder showing the audit trail and our corrective action. He shook my hand and said he appreciated the transparency. Not one client left. Every single contract stayed. That Friday was also the day Karen played her last card. She had her attorney contact one with what amounted to a threat dressed up in legal language. Karen was pregnant. She would be claiming the child was mine unless I agreed to a more favorable divorce settlement. She wanted the house, 60% of the business value, and 18 months of spousal support. In exchange, she wouldn't pursue a paternity claim that would at minimum create a legal presumption of fatherhood and tie me to child support for 18 years. One called me, read me the letter, asked how I wanted to respond. I told him to respond with 3 things. First, I wasn't signing the birth certificate or any paperwork that could be twisted into acceptance. Juan would be filing to contest paternity and requesting court-ordered DNA testing immediately after the birth. Second, any attempt to fraudulently establish paternity would be met with a countersuit for fraud. Third, I had time-stamped evidence proving I was over 100 miles away during the week of conception, along with the affair footage establishing the actual father's identity. Karen's attorney withdrew the threat within 48 hours. The leverage, she thought she had evaporated the moment she realized I'd been documenting everything. Not just the money, but the timeline, the travel records, the hotel receipts from Waycross. All of it. By Friday evening, Shell had no business, no income, no access to any accounts, a civil suit demanding repayment of over $200,000 plus treble damages, and a potential criminal investigation. Karen had no job, no access to the books she'd used to steal from me, a divorce filing that painted her as a co-conspirator in financial fraud, and a pregnancy she could no longer use as leverage. I went home Friday night, sat on my dock, and watched the tide come in across the marsh. It was the first quiet evening I'd had in months. The next several months played out like gravity doing its job. The divorce moved fast on temporary orders. The judge entered interim rulings within weeks, granting me exclusive possession of the house, sole control of the business, and freezing joint accounts pending final resolution. Karen's attorney tried to argue she was entitled to half the business value and spousal support given her pregnancy. Juan countered with the fraud documentation, showing she'd already extracted well over $100,000 from the company illegally. The judge was not sympathetic to Karen's position on the temporary orders and set the final hearing for after the birth, so the paternity question could be resolved. Karen had the baby a few months later, a boy. He was born with a serious congenital heart issue that meant surgery early and ongoing specialist care. The kind of thing that eats money and requires stability she didn't have. Within days of the birth, Juan filed for court-ordered paternity testing. I hadn't signed the birth certificate or any paperwork that could create a presumption. The test confirmed what I already knew. The baby wasn't mine. Shell was the father. With the test results in hand, the court entered an order removing any presumption of my legal responsibility for the child. One made sure that paperwork was airtight. The final divorce decree came down shortly after the paternity results were filed. I kept the house, the business, and 80% of joint assets. She got her car and personal belongings. No alimony. The judge cited her documented role in the financial fraud as a significant factor in the distribution. She delivered at Memorial in Savannah alone. Shell wasn't there. My mother wasn't there. Her cousin Keely, the one whose identity she'd used for the Shell company, had cut her off completely after the fraud came to light. The civil suit against Shell took longer. His attorney tried to argue the operating agreement was ambiguous about fiduciary duties and that some of the transactions were legitimate. But our operating agreement, the original one I'd insisted on when we formed the LLC, had an explicit clause requiring mutual written consent for any vendor relationship exceeding $10,000 annually and prohibiting either member from holding undisclosed financial interests in any company doing business with Tidewater. Shell had violated both provisions repeatedly. ROA's forensic report dismantled every remaining argument. The Shell company, the fake invoices, the rerouted payments. All of it was documented down to the penny. Shell settled before trial for the full restitution amount plus $60,000 in damages. He didn't have the cash. He signed over his truck, his boat, his savings, and agreed to a 5-year payment plan on the remainder. Juan attached a lien to the settlement agreement to protect our position. The DA's office declined to prosecute. Not enough resources for the case size, they said. Juan wasn't surprised. He said criminal charges in financial fraud cases against individuals were always a long shot without a motivated prosecutor. But the civil judgment was on public record, and in this industry, that's a death sentence. I restructured Tidewater as a single-member LLC, hired a new bookkeeper, a retired Navy chief named Odell, who'd spent 20 years managing supply logistics on destroyers and didn't have a creative bone in his body.
Perfect.
I wanted boring, competent, and honest. Odell was all three. I also hired a full-time office administrator named Priya, who handled scheduling and client communications. Kept the same field crews. The guys who worked for me knew something had gone down, but they were blue-collar guys who understood that personal business stays personal. Nobody asked questions. Everybody showed up on time. Business actually improved after the split. Without Shell skimming and Karen padding invoices, our actual margins were better than I'd realized. I bid more aggressively on 3 new contracts and won all of them. Landed a maintenance agreement with a paper mill in Rincon. Picked up a 5-year bridge coding program with the county. Revenue climbed past $3.5 million. Shell's life went the other direction. Without the business income, without any clients, without a reputation, he scrambled. He tried to start his own coding outfit. Nobody would hire him. Word gets around in industrial contracting. One of my guys told me Shell showed up at the paper mill in Rincon with a bid package, the same mill I just landed a contract with. The plant manager looked at the bid, looked at Shell, and told him to leave the property. Didn't even open the envelope. Just handed it back and pointed at the gate. Shell sat in his truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes before he drove off. The plant manager called me that afternoon to let me know. Said he thought I should be aware. I thanked him and got back to work. He ended up taking day labor on a commercial roofing crew. Manual work, 60-hour weeks, low pay. About a year and a half after I locked him out of Tidewater, he was on a job site in Brunswick when a section of staging collapsed under him. He fell 9 feet onto a concrete pad. Herniated 2 discs in his lower back, L4 to L5 and L5 to S1. The kind of injury that doesn't heal right, even with surgery. And Shell didn't have insurance because the roofing outfit paid him under the table. He got surgery eventually, some charity care program at Memorial, but the recovery was slow and incomplete. Chronic pain, limited mobility. Couldn't lift, couldn't climb, couldn't do the physical work he'd built his whole identity around. The guy who used to carry 80-pound blast pots up scaffolding like they were grocery bags now couldn't bend over to tie his own boots. Last I heard, he was living in a trailer park outside Jessup, collecting disability checks that barely covered rent, and couldn't stand for more than 20 minutes without sitting down.
I didn't feel good about that.
Didn't feel bad either. He put himself in a position where he had no insurance, no savings, no safety net, because he'd spent a decade's worth of goodwill stealing from the one person who'd have caught him if he fell. She tried to get child support from Shell, filed in family court. Child support took priority over my civil judgment on his wages, but it didn't matter much. Shell was on disability and barely working. The court calculated what he could pay based on his actual income, not what he used to make. She got a court-ordered $214 a month from a man who could barely stand, let alone hold down a real job. $214 a month for a baby with a heart condition that needed specialist care she couldn't afford. She moved in with a friend from high school, then moved out after 2 months when the friendship couldn't handle the weight of a newborn with medical needs and a mother with no income. Then moved to an apartment complex in Midway, a place I only know about because she tried to list me as an emergency contact on the baby's medical forms, and the hospital called to verify. I told them I had no relationship with the patient or the mother and asked them to remove my information. Karen had burned every bridge she had. Shell was broken and broke. My mother, last I'd heard, had tried reaching out to Karen once and been told to stay away. Even the people who enabled them didn't want to be around the wreckage. It's been 3 years now. I'm 40. Tidewater is running clean and profitable. 12 full-time employees, 2 spray rigs, house paid off, business debt-free. I'm pricing out a new blast rig that would let us take on offshore platform work. I met a woman named Josette 8 months after the divorce was final. Marine surveyor. Works with cargo insurers. We've been together for 2 years now, living in the Isle of Hope house, which I kept and which has no trace of Karen left in it. My mother is still alive as far as I know. She's tried reaching me a few times over the years. Letters returned, messages shut down. She left one voicemail on an old number saying she was sorry. I believe her. It doesn't change what she asked me to do. Shell reached out once about a year ago. Handwritten letter to the office. I didn't open it. Put it through the shredder the same way I'd shred a junk mail flyer. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Dale never called about the Garnet volumes. How long it would have gone on, how much more they would have taken. But it doesn't matter. He called. I listened. I moved. So, I've shared my story, every painful, calculating detail. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced such a profound betrayal from people you loved and trusted? What did you do to rebuild? Let me know in the comments below. I'm truly curious to hear your thoughts and experiences.